Yeah, I mean, I think there's a misconception in Sweden, but also in the States, that feminism is anti-male. I've never believed that for a moment. And in fact, some of the best things that ever happened to men have been because of feminism. I mean, feminism is the ideology that that women deserve as much freedom and as many rights as men do. It's pretty basic stuff. To me, it's basic democracy. It's the basic belief in democracy. Believe that all people should have the same rights and responsibilities and such. But I'll give you an example of how men have benefited from feminism. In the domestic violence field, we've been talking for the past 20 years about the effects of domestic violence on children. All the children growing up in homes where their father abuses their mother's boyfriend abuses their mother. Sometimes their mother is the abuser. This is true in gay male relationships, it's true in lesbian relationships. There's an awful lot of kids, sadly, growing up in homes in Sweden, in the States, and all over the world who are being exposed to domestic violence, right? There's a term people have used to talk about those kids, and I don't know if you use this in Sweden, but we call it children who witness domestic violence. And sometimes people shorthand that to say children who witness, right? But I don't like the term children who witness domestic violence. You know why? Because if you're a 7-year-old kid cowering in the closet as your father or another man is raging against your mother, you're not a witness, you're a victim. You're not observing something happening to somebody else, you're experiencing it happening to yourself. The experience of trauma is much more immediate and profound than is suggested by the passive word witness. Well, guess what? The category of children who are being traumatized in this way includes not just girls, but also boys. Do you have any idea how many boys in Sweden are in families where they're being traumatized by an adult man's violence against their mother and sometimes themselves and their siblings? Do you have any idea how many boys are in the juvenile system, in other words, locked up for committing antisocial behavior, crimes, in the Swedish system, who are in the system in part because their life journey started out as traumatized little boys? Do you have any idea how many men are in the prisons of Sweden? In the prisons of Sweden because they were once little boys who were traumatized, and that what they did is they took a path that we give often to boys and young men who have experienced trauma, which is somebody took something from me, I'm going to take it from somebody else, which is why boys who have been brutalized, boys who have been traumatized, are something like 10 times more likely to become abusive of others than boys who haven't. And you know who have been the people who have been speaking out about domestic violence for 40 or 50 years? It's been women in the battered women's movement in Sweden, in the United States, and all over Europe and other parts of the world. It's been those women who have been calling out adult men's violence and saying this is not acceptable, not just because it's harming women, although that's important enough, but it's also harming children, and that those children include boys. So in other words, all these women who are in the field, in the domestic violence and sexual assault field, many of them strong feminist women, have been pushing at this for years and decades. And they've been doing that in solidarity, not just with women and girls, but also with men and boys who have been victims of abuse and violence. And so the idea that somehow they're anti-male, I just don't buy it. Okay, I don't buy it. I'll give you another example of how men and boys have benefited from feminism. There's been a women's health movement in the United States and in Europe and other parts of the world, starting in the early 1970s. The women's health movement was a way to look at ways in which women's gender norms around women, the way the healthcare delivery system works, the way that women's second-class status affects in societies, affects their health outcomes. It's the women's health movement, right? It's an important ongoing movement all over the world. But there's a men's health movement, which is more recent. It's about 20-something years old, where what it is looking at ways in which cultural ideologies and beliefs about manhood have affected men's health, physical health, emotional and psychological health, sexual health. I mean, for example, depression, which is a big problem among men, depression, right? Depression, which then causes all kinds of other problems, including relational challenges and all kinds of problems, right? Well, the men's health movement is directly indebted to the feminist-led women's health movement and some of the major figures in men's health, including some of the major figures in the States who have been writing about men's depression, men's emotional and physical and sexual health. Some of those key men have themselves directly credited feminist women with creating the paradigm, creating the ideas and the sort of intellectual architecture and political support for thinking about health in a gendered way, which directly benefits men. So when we talk about how many men are now needing support, who needing mental health treatment, needing help for depression, needing help for other physical and sexual and emotional problems that they have, how often do you hear women, feminist women, credited with creating the cultural space and energy for men to think about that and for men to get help for that? You're much more likely to hear, oh, feminists hate men, feminists have some categorical antipathy towards men. It's just so ignorant. And how many people know what I just said? They're more likely to believe the Jordan Petersons of the world, who are out there saying, "Oh, feminists they're just ignorant about history, and they're ignorant about biology, and they're ignorant about the natural order of things, and you men need to just not even pay attention to those women." It's like, and thousands of men actually take that seriously, when in fact some of us figured out a long time ago that feminism is not anti-male. In fact, it's one of the best things that ever happened to men. And so many of the problems in men's lives, feminism is not the cause of. Feminism is the solution for a lot of those problems. Now, having just said that, you know what? I know that there are men who are going to say, that guy's just totally, drink the Kool-Aid. That guy's just totally, his mind has been totally colonized by those feminists, and he can't even think for himself. And I'm just going to say, I call BS on that. I don't believe that for 1 nanosecond. I don't believe that my mind has been colonized. I don't believe that I am somehow, influenced by feminists in some way that I'm not thinking for myself. I am a man. I work with men. I've been working with men across class and race, in tough guy culture, in gang culture, but also certainly in military and sports culture for decades. And I know that so many men are walking wounded. There's so many men who have issues and problems. You walk down the street, if you just did a random on the street sort of interviews with men, so many men have so many problems. And feminism is not the cause of those problems. Feminism is an attempt to understand how narrow definitions of manhood have harmed men and have harmed relationships and have harmed children. And one of the reasons why we have so much dysfunctional behavior by men, so much violence that men commit, both against women and against other men and against children, so much of that has to do with narrow definitions of manhood, men's inability to be emotionally literate, to be able to figure out how to deal with grief and disappointment and hurt other than lashing out at somebody, how you can live, how you can accept that you have vulnerability and you have sadness and you have grief and you have sometimes feelings of failure, that you don't have to then project that onto other people and get angry at other people and blame them for your problems. Some of this is so basic. And so the idea that somehow feminism itself is the problem is just, it's totally backwards. It's like topsy-turvy land. And I understand. I watch what's happening. I watch Jordan Peterson's popularity. I watch the growth of the Sweden Democrats. I watch the Trump movement in my country, in the United States, and I say, oh my God, we got to do a better job at talking to men, especially white men, about how to be part of the changes, the positive changes that have been happening in our societies, rather than trying to, hold back the tides of history. You know what I mean? Because we're talking about the tides of history. We're talking about women advancing and LGBT people advancing and the culture becoming more and more and the world becoming more ethnically and racially diverse. That's all happening. It's not going to stop. It's like, and you know what? One of the key qualities of evolutionary success, one of the key characteristics, is adaptability, right? So adaptability to local environments is, I think, the single most important factor for evolutionary success. Adaptability. What that means for white men is adapting to the reality that we are no longer completely occupying center stage, that women are now challenging us in fundamental ways, and that's the way it should be, because it's not fair that we have center stage just because we happen to be born men. And people of color getting the same sort of rights and opportunities that white people have is a positive thing. It's a positive step forward. Adapting to that reality as a white man, for example, is a positive quality that means that your genes are gonna propagate, your genes are going to go to the next generation. If you're just standing at the barriers and trying to prevent the tides of history and trying to hold back the tides of history, you're on the wrong side. I'm sorry. And it's sad to me to watch men, including decent guys, I think, who are just misled and misguided into taking a really conservative, anti-feminist, anti-multicultural sort of stance, as if somehow that's going to be successful, as if somehow that's an appropriate response to these enormous shifts that are happening in our societies. So I mean, I just think we should offer those men a more positive message. You have a role to play. We need more white men, not just white men. We need men across the spectrum to stand up and stand with women as their partners and allies, to stand with women in the battered women's and sexual assault movements and the movements against sexual harassment. We need men not just because of altruism, not just because we care about women, although that's important. It's because we care about men as well. I mean, the same system that produces men who abuse women produces men who abuse other men. I see so many men, I know so many men who are victims of other men's violence, and they don't make the connection between their experience of violence at the hands of other men and women's experience of violence at the hands of men. They think it's two separate issues. They're not two separate issues. They're directly related. So if you're a man and you care about men, and you care about men's lives, you should be involved with this work. You should stand and support in solidarity with feminist women. If you're a man, especially if you care about boys, not just girls, obviously it's important to care about girls, but if you care about boys and you're an adult man and you're in a position to influence young men, if you're a father, if you're a teacher, you're an uncle, you're a big brother, you're a coach, you're a mentor to young men and boys, what can you do to help those boys be healthier than you are, to be healthier in terms of understanding the diversity of the society that you live in, and to be able to navigate the complexities of gender and sex and race and ethnicity, rather than hunkering down and defending some old order that's obviously fading. How can you be part of the positive change, and how can you impart some of those skills and understandings to young men and boys, because they desperately need adult men to do that. And I think a lot of adult men themselves need support, because I think a lot of adult men don't have this all figured out. And I don't have it all figured out. I mean, I feel like I know a lot, but I'm still learning all the time. How do you do all this? And I think it's a process that we should all be in together. And I think that, by the way, I think that men and women working together is fundamental to this. It's like we're not enemies. We're not like taking the side of men or the side of women against men. I mean, this is so simple-minded, this thinking, that somehow women are aligned against us and we have to defend ourselves, and what about men? It's like, this is so juvenile. It's like we need to stand together. And I think, and that would be the message that I would have to men, is stand with women in this struggle for justice, for fairness, for reducing violence, for accepting differences. Stand with women, and we need more men who have the courage to do that. And it takes courage, by the way. A lot of times in male culture, and it doesn't mean just 16-year-old boys, it means 50-year-old corporate executives. It takes courage and guts sometimes for a man to challenge his friends, or to interrupt his friends who are acting out in sexist ways or making degrading comments about women. It takes courage sometimes for a man to literally stand with women in a physical space and declare their support for women's rights and for feminism. It takes guts sometimes, and I appreciate that. And I think we need more men who can find the courage and the self-confidence to do that. Because to me, that's what it's about. Because if you're a guy, being one of the guys takes nothing special. Just going along with the guys, going along with your boys, being one of the guys, that's nothing special. What takes something special is if you see your guys going in a direction which you think is wrong, is turning to them and saying, guys, I care about you, I love you, you're my friends, you're my brothers, but you can't do this, or I can't be part of this if this is going to be abusive, if it's going to be sexist or racist. I can't be part of it because it's it's against my deeply held values for democracy and for justice and fairness. That takes so much more guts as a man than just going along with the group. And yet the guy who does it gets called soft, and he gets called the wuss, and he's weak. Are you kidding me? It's like topsy-turvy land. It's exactly the opposite. It takes courage and strength and leadership for men to do that. And so I think we need to say that to young men and to older men, and say we need more men in Swedish society who have the courage and strength to stand up and to respond to these times in a positive and progressive way, rather than hunker down in a defensive crouch. I mean, I think that's what we need to do to go forward.